Welcome to another episode of the Field of 68's off-season grades. My name is Rob Dauster. I have with me today none other than John Fanta, and we are going to be breaking down one of the more interesting teams to inhabit the Big East this season, and that is the St. John's Red Storm, who lost about 8 players in the offseason, right? But went out and had I don't know how to phrase it. Did they have a good? Did they have a great? Did they have a solid? Did they have a disappointing season going out and getting into the portal? Because they landed a stud in Kadari Richmond. They landed one of the more underrated guys in Devin Smith. They brought in an Aaron Scott and a Vince Uchukwu who can both kind of do a job. But they also missed on a couple of the guys who went into the portal because of the presence of St. John's. And they missed on a couple guys that could have entered the portal and decided not to end up transferring out of their program this season. So all that said, I'm kind of torn on this team. I'll be honest with you, John. I love the idea of Kadari Richmond, Devin Smith, and RJ Luis playing as the 1, the 2, and the 3 in a team coached by Rick Pitino. Like, good luck. That team is going to force 800,000 turnovers a night, right? I also have very real questions about a team that has Kadari Richmond, RJ Luis, and Devin Smith playing on a team or playing in an era where, like, you got to be able to make shots from the perimeter. So I'll turn it over to you. What do you make of their offseason? What do you make of their roster? And what do you make of round 2 for Rick Pitino in Queens, New York?
So, St. John's enters this upcoming season, and provided that they do hear their name called for the NCAA tournament, which is not a given in Queens ever, and not just because of Rick Pitino, no, just because of the circumstances. They will have not been in 6 years heading into March 2025. Not since 2019 when one Chris Mullen was the head coach of the Red Storm. That drought is one drought, but the second drought is this. We hit 2025, Rob, and I don't know if you believe in numbers or the things are meant to be. And the drought for this program without an NCAA tournament win will hit a quarter century, 25 years. I believe that drought comes to an end this upcoming season. Now, a follow-up to that. I can believe that drought comes to an end while also stating that there's one real pressure on Rick Pitino in year 2 on this job because year 1 was a flop. And you could come back and say to me, what do you mean they won 20 games? We are not in the participation trophy list. No longer is St. John's in the let's be relevant list. This past season was a failure. They had a miserable January and February. They were not good enough, and they missed the NCAA tournament. And Rick Pitino would tell you that, and that's why they had the roster overhaul that they had. So that drought, when you hire Rick Pitino, Rob, you say we're going to end that drought within the first 2 years. So it better end. Like I'm partially saying it's going to end, but also saying, like, it kind of has to end for this to be deemed a success through 2 years. Because if they're still sitting here and if they miss the NCAA tournament again, then we're going to really start to ask some questions. But I think they're going to make it. And if they just make it and lose, it's going to be, now they've got to win a game. They got to end this drought. This team's good enough to end this drought. But Rob, you and I both know when Pitino takes this job, we're not talking about St. John's winning a tournament game. We were originally talking about them being a relevant top 15, 4 Sweet 16 type program in college basketball. This team gets them a step further in my mind, but it is not at the level that I think on paper they thought it would be when this staff took over in Queens. Does that make sense?
Yeah. 100%. And I think that on paper, had they landed a 5-man that could be an elite rim protector, like, I don't know, maybe someone like a Cliff O'Mori, right? Imagine if they had landed a player like that, Finn. If they bring in a guy like that, then to me, this is a top 20 team because you could just look at them and say, yeah, they're going to be like a number one defense in America. They're going to force turnovers on 27% of their possessions. They're going to get plenty of layups. They got a rim protector in case they don't end up getting one of those steals. And this is a quintessential offense, might be hard to watch, but no one's scoring on your Rick Pitino kind of a defense, right? We've seen lots of Rick Pitino teams do that, and we've seen them have a lot of success. Without that rim protector, I do have some questions. Vince Uwachukwu is a guy that was a former 5-star that had a heart issue at USC. He came back this past season. He was fine. He looked like a kid that hadn't played in a year. And beyond that, like they don't. Zubi Ejiofor is a guy that like Kansas transfer. He was okay as a backup big. I don't know if you really want to trust him as the 5-man there. So that's kind of my biggest question, because with Kadari, Devin Smith, RJ Luis, Simeon Wilcher, Aaron Scott, Brady Dunlap to a point, like I think you have enough on the perimeter, even some of the freshmen they got coming in. I think you have enough on the perimeter to be able to do the stuff you want to do defensively and be able to force the turnovers the way you want to force them. My concern is that with the lack of shooting they have on the roster, a lot of what they're going to have to do is score points in transition and score off of turnovers and score off of their defense. And when you don't have that rim protector and you're a team that is kind of built on, we're going to gamble, we're going to try to get some steals, we're going to play that quintessential 2-2-1 Rick Pitino press, we're going to do some of the stuff that he did defensively this past year, then you open yourself up to giving up a lot of buckets around the rim on easy shots. And that's kind of where I land with them, which is why, for me, my X factor this year is like, does that rim protector emerge? Like, is that Vince Uwachukwu? Can he be the guy that can kind of live up to that 5-star pedigree that he has? And I hope he does, because it's not his fault. Like, there's nothing he could do. He had a heart condition. So I'm hoping that he develops into that guy, because if he does, then I think that this St. John's team has a very, very high ceiling.
I think they do too. And based on what I'm hearing from Queens, they have been really impressed by Zubi Ejiofor's development.
Okay.
And they even liked him at times more than Joel Soriano this past year. But Soriano was handed the keys to the car, the captain's keys for this program. Rob, I don't know if that was always the best thing for last year's St. John's team. You know, I think Pitino handed him the keys. I don't think I like Joel quite a bit. I don't know if that leadership ever fully translated to consistent results. They're high on Iwachukwu. I mean, they love what he's showing them. Great motor, 7'1", 240. Like the framework's there. And how many times have you and I seen that big man who just breaks out? He is fully healthy. He's under a new system. He just starts to become his own man. You know, and he turns into something totally different, switches it up a notch. You know, I'm not saying to the level of production, but, you know, N'Faly Dante comes to mind here with Oregon and his evolution. He spent 5 years at Oregon. Look at what he was at the end of the road. You know, I think that they envision Vince Uwachukwu being that type of guy over the next 2 years for their program. They want him to take off this year and be a big-time force for them and be physical. I'm not as worried about the big men as I am the shot making.
Yeah.
For me, the biggest question for this team is they've got distributors in Smith and Richmond. Now, Kadari Richmond goes through his hot spells of shooting. I mean, last year, he led Seton Hall. For a 3-week span, Rob, Seton Hall was playing as well as anybody in the country.
Mm-hmm.
I know the words sound crazy, and yes, I'm an alum of the school, but they were. They had about a 3 or 4 week span where they were playing as well as anybody, beating UConn, beating Marquette on a day Marquette played really well, taking Creighton to triple overtime. Richmond was phenomenal. Ball was on a string. He was knocking down shots. He's a New York City Park type finisher. What do I mean by that? He sometimes throws the ball up and you're thinking, where the hell is that going? Oh my God, it went in. He's a really unique player. How does his personality mesh with Pitino? Richmond's a different kind of cat. He's a different type of player. Shaheen Holloway and him, they went at it a couple times. They did. Holloway was very hard on Richmond. Rob, you think Pitino's going to be any easier on him? I don't care what the NIL bag said. No. So So for this team, it comes down not just to Smith and Richmond, but another big thing. Can RJ Lewis stay healthy? He's got to stay healthy for them. And then one more thing. Simeon Wilcher showed some flashes. That's got to become more consistent. But then I go back to this, Rob. There's only one basketball. There's only one basketball. I like Wilcher. I like Smith. I like Richmond. Do they do a lot of the same things? Who's knocking down shots for this team? Who's knocking down shots for this team? That is my biggest question for this team. I think it's the biggest X factor for this team.
Yeah, I don't. It's the factor, right? Like they have to be able to make shots from the perimeter. And yeah, well, we'll see how that ends up playing out. The expectations for them. So I think when you look at the Big East, at least for me, UConn is going to be the team that everybody picks to be the favorite. And while I agree with that, this is a situation where there's a lot of you guys can go back and watch the UConn episode that we did, but there are questions that need to be answered and that I think will be answered with this team. But suffice to say, this UConn team would be ranked much more closely to where Creighton, Xavier, Marquette are if it was not coached by Dan Hurley. But that's to me the top four. Then I think you get to like Providence, you get to St. John's at this point, maybe Seton Hall. I think that's kind of where it shakes out for me. So my question is St. John's good enough to push for that fifth spot? Can they get to that fifth spot? Because they finished fifth in the Big East. I don't think you're going to have a weird year like last year. I think if you're fifth in the Big East, you're more likely not going to end up dancing this season. Whether you are a world-class athlete or a podcaster like me, we all understand the importance of mental and physical well-being and proper recovery for top-notch performance. After a 6-month season loaded with cross-country travel, I can promise you that proper recovery is a priority for me these days. That's why I'm excited that Unified Healing is sponsoring this episode of the Field of 68. Unified Healing is a new and super innovative global network of wellness centers powered by Energy Enhancement System, or the EE system. If you haven't heard of the EE system yet, you'll want to listen up. This technology promotes wellness, deep relaxation, purification, and rejuvenation. Whether you're here in New Jersey or at one of the hundreds of other locations across the globe, access to a center is easy and affordable. If you're interested in experiencing the EE system technology for yourself, go to unifiedhealing.com/unified68 to learn more and find a center near you. That's UNIFYD healing.com/UNIFYD, the number 6, the number 8. No material or testimonials on the Unified Healing website are intended to be viewed as medical advice or as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or treatment and before undertaking a new healthcare regimen, including the EE system.
Yeah, you're going to end up dancing. I think last year was an outlier for this league. Let's not jump to conclusions here. I think at one point, Rob, we were on in the beginning of the season, and you guys were saying maybe it's only a 3-bid league. Then we got to the middle of the season, we're like, that was kind of silly of us to say. And then it ended up being true because of the amount of bid stealers. The 3-bid casualty was in large part because of bid stealers. It's at least a 4-bid league last year. If you don't get an absurd amount of bid stealers, probably 5. That being said, well, they jump into their schedule. I like this schedule. I think it's a good schedule. They've got Fordham, Quinnipiac, Wagner, then New Mexico at the Garden. Rob, I don't know about you, but if we're in the area, I would like to go to that game. I would like to go to that game. I hope, I'm fingers crossed, maybe calling that game would be an absolute treat, because Richard Pitino versus his dad, you and I both have gotten to know Richard.
I'm just imagining a behind the scenes FS1 broadcast where you cut to Rick Pitino and it's like, what are we doing? You want to do this? And then you got to Richard and it's like, I mean, we're just not very good. We suck. What do you want me to do?
Exactly. So I'm intrigued to see that. Then they go to Baha Mar. Now, Rob, This is interesting. Baylor, Tennessee. All right, that's two top. Baylor definitely top 10. Two top 15 or so teams, and then Virginia, who, it's no slouch. They're going to be good enough. Like that's a challenging MTE. You don't want
You
to
could
lose both
very
there.
easily go 0-2 in that. You could
You better
very
not.
easily go 0-2.
You better not. You got to find a way to a win
Yep.
there. Then you got Georgia in the Bahamas. Not a cakewalk. Georgia's going to be improved. Now, I think St. John's should win that game.
Mm-hmm.
I would take them in that game. Harvard, Kansas State at the Garden on Saturday, December 7th. Whoa, that's now become a really interesting game. The point, Rob, they can't go over between Baha Mar and Kansas State too. They're gonna have to win, at least a game of consequence. Because Rob, I think that cost them this past year. They didn't do enough in their non-conference. They got thumped by a bad Michigan team. In Charleston, they did not do enough. They lost their opening game down in Charleston. I'm trying to remember to who they lost to they beat North Texas and they lost to Dayton. And they just all throughout, they just didn't do enough. They lost to Boston College. Part of the reason why they missed the tournament last year was because their non-conference was not good.
Mm-hmm.
They can't be figuring things out in early December. And I just look at all the new pieces and parts, and it makes me say, Rob, are they going to be spending time figuring things out? I think UConn's 1 in the Big East, Creighton's 2, Marquette 3, Xavier 4 right now. St. John's is 4 or 5 in the league for me.
Yeah, they're right there with me for me too. I probably have them 5th, but I get the argument. I get the sense. So let's get into the grades for the off season because I think we differ a little bit here. I have it as a B-, and the reason why I have it as a B- is I think that they got talent in and they retained some players, and I don't think it should be overlooked at like bringing back RJ Louis, Zubi Ejiofor, Dunlap, Wilcher. Like you brought back guys that'll be there for more than 1 year, but you didn't really address like 2 biggest issues that I think you have. One of them is shooting, right? I think that you probably need to do a little bit more to address the issues that you have with shooting there. And then 2 was the rebounding and the front court, the 5-man. And if you're going to tell me Vince Uwachukwu ends up being like looking like the 5-star that he was, I'll take the L on that one. But on paper, I'm going to give them a B-. I'm a little concerned about that.
I'm going to give them a B+ because you still brought in 2 guys who have posted triple doubles at the college level. And I think that maybe Kadari Richmond having to have a bit lesser of a role, he's still going to have a major role. But at Seton Hall, he had to do everything for that team. You wonder if Smith is on the ball here and there, if that enables Richmond to be more of a knockdown shooter from time to time. The shot is not bad. It's not bad. It just needs a little bit of evolving. But Rob, there were streaks last year where he turned it on and was knocking down the 3 more and more consistently. RJ Lewis, he's got to stay healthy for this team. Might be the single biggest X factor for me. But I like this team. I do think it's going to be interesting to see if Sim Wilcher and Brady Dunlap could take a leap. If you remember, Dunlap went through about a 2-week stretch last year where he looked really good. Had a great game against Villanova. Stepped up as a freshman. Hard to be a freshman under Rick Pitino. And he did. And they're high on Jaden Glover as well. They just picked up Ruben Prey. They seem to like him as well. So I think they've got depth. I think they're definitely different from last year where it was Danish Jenkins and Joel Soriano, and then we'll see. Jordan Dingle was way up and down. Chris Ludlam was way up and down. They got to get consistency. When you look at Smith and Richmond, their numbers have showed pretty doggone good.
Mm-hmm.
But if this team knocks down perimeter shots at a capable rate, I'm buying that Iwachukwu and Ejiofor make up a formidable enough front court duo. If they can hit some threes, watch out. St. John's can be a Big East dark horse and a top 3 team in the Big East. I give their offseason a B+ because Richmond and Smith were both highly coveted and they still were able to get them.
Yeah, there is something to be said for having the best player on the floor in most of the games that you're going to end up playing. Fanta, always a pleasure catching up, man. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Rob. Get ready, Queens. I know you will be, St. John's fans.